years of my life seeing her with Cody and seeing their marriage. But, I want her to be happy.
For years, the world has watched in real time what can only be described as the slow-motion collapse of Cody Brown's once grand plural family empire. A reality television dynasty that had built its identity on the illusion of unity, spiritual commitment, and unwavering love. Viewers witnessed one wife after another slip away from his orbit. First Christine, then Janelle, and finally Mary, until only one figure remained steadfastly at his side. Robyn, the so-called favorite, the emotional cornerstone, the woman who, for more than a decade, had been presented as his soulmate, his endgame, the one who would endure while others walked away. Their union was presented to the world as unshakable, romanticized in countless confessionals and filmed moments, a love story supposedly forged through sacrifice, faith, and resilience. But beneath the surface of this carefully curated fairy tale, there lay a foundation built not on unbreakable trust or shared vision, but on preferential treatment, secrecy, and, as many long suspected, a steady stream of reality television money that had papered over the cracks for years. When that money began to dry up and the external scaffolding could no longer bear the weight of their internal rot, the grand house of cards began to tremble. Today we delve deep behind the polished facade, beyond the soft lighting and rehearsed smiles, to expose a story that has been quietly unfolding in court filings, whispered legal proceedings, and conversations no camera crew ever captured. This is the story of the Browns' financial unraveling, a chain reaction of ambition, ego, and misplaced loyalty that has left even their most loyal defenders questioning everything they thought they knew. What began with whispers from former production staff has grown into a narrative backed by alleged bankruptcy proceedings, insider testimony, and a string of financial missteps that would be almost tragic if they weren't so predictable. It starts not with a fight, as one might expect from a marriage often portrayed as emotionally volatile, but with something far colder and far more final: a letter. A certified letter from a bankruptcy trustee, discreetly delivered to the lavish Flagstaff estate once celebrated on national television as a symbol of Robyn's status. It was the same house that fans had come to call the Shiro Chateau, a monument to Cody's promise of security, permanence, and financial power. According to sources close to their legal team, Cody and Robyn entered into Chapter 13 bankruptcy nearly 8 months ago. Not a casual debt restructuring, but what one insider described as a catastrophic financial event. At the heart of their empire's collapse was a simple truth: the TLC money, once their lifeline, had been stretched thinner with every departure, while their expenditures, inflated by years of grandeur, remained staggeringly high. Robyn's mortgage alone amounted to a small fortune. The still undeveloped land at Coyote Pass drained their accounts month after month, and on top of that, Cody's increasingly erratic business ventures turned into a black hole for their remaining capital. Having lost the power of his patriarchal narrative, he desperately sought to reinvent himself as a rugged entrepreneur and self-styled thought leader. Insiders allege he sunk large sums into a boutique firearms accessory company that never got off the ground, a so-called sovereign man supplement line marketed toward survivalists, and even an app designed to help modern patriarchs manage complex family dynamics. The irony of this last venture was not lost on anyone familiar with the chaos he presided over. Each of these ventures failed spectacularly, leaving their finances in freefall. Gone was the carefully cultivated image of a powerful patriarch surrounded by a devoted plural family. In its place was a man cornered by debt, his once loyal partner trapped alongside him in a crumbling empire. The house that had been presented as a fairy tale fortress began to feel more like a mausoleum for a life they could no longer afford. Insiders paint a picture of mounting dread within its walls, 5 bedrooms echoing with silence, collectibles gathering dust, and a once proud couple circling each other in mounting resentment. Robyn, long perceived as the soft-spoken, fragile favorite, struggled under the weight of a reality that no longer matched the story she'd spent years selling. For months, denial had been her armor. She reassured her older children that their father always had a plan, that he would fix everything as he always had. But as final notices began stacking on the kitchen counter, her denial curdled into quiet, simmering resentment. That resentment manifested not as explosive confrontations at first, but in the kind of passive-aggressive exchanges familiar to anyone who has watched the show closely. A petty argument over a grocery bill masked the fury over an investment that had bled tens of thousands of dollars. A sharp comment about a light left on at night was a displaced fear of a power bill they could no longer ignore. Meanwhile, Cody himself was spiraling. His entire self-image had been built on being the commanding center of a grand plural family, the king of his own carefully constructed kingdom. But now his subjects had walked away, not in shame or silence, but in triumph. Christine had remarried and became a fan favorite. Janelle had embraced independence and financial freedom, and Mary had carved out her own business and identity outside the family structure. Their successes stood in sharp contrast to his failure, and he found himself alone with the one wife who, in his mind, had orchestrated his isolation. Over time, that perception hardened into something darker. Every conversation he'd ever had with Robyn, every tear she'd ever shed, every time she'd leaned on her fragility to sway his decisions, he began replaying it all with a new, sinister interpretation. Her insistence on a large, expensive house became, in his mind, a financial trap. Her emotional neediness became a drain on the energy he believed he needed to save their empire. The children's dependence on him became, he thought, a deliberate ploy to monopolize his time and loyalty. Thus began the blame game, contained within the echoing walls of their once idyllic mansion. With no other wives left to act as buffers or scapegoats, their collective frustration had nowhere to go but inward. The first public crack came in the form of a scene witnessed by neighbors. One afternoon, Cody was seen pacing furiously in the front garden, screaming into his mobile phone. "They took everything and I have nothing left to give," he shouted, his voice carrying across the street. But he wasn't shouting at Christine, Janelle, or Mary. According to sources, he was on the phone with a loan officer, being denied a critical line of credit that he had hoped would keep their financial ship afloat. When he stepped back inside, Robyn confronted him, not with sympathy, but with anger. "Why are you embarrassing us in front of the neighbors?" she allegedly demanded. For a man already consumed by a siege mentality, those words were like petrol on an open fire. He had been fighting for what he believed was their survival, and she cared about appearances. What followed, according to insider accounts, was a shouting match that stretched on for hours and broke an unspoken seal between them. For the first time, Cody directed his unfiltered rage at Robyn. He accused her of treating him like a walking bank account, of refusing to contribute meaningfully, of expecting him to carry the weight of their fantasy while she played the part of the fragile queen. Robyn responded as she always had. Tears first, the trembling lip, the familiar refrain of not understanding why he was being so cruel. But this time it didn't work. His rage burned too hot. In that moment, something shifted in her as well. She fought back. She screamed that he had been a terrible leader, that he had driven the other wives away with his arrogance and temper, that she had sacrificed her dream of a sisterhood for him only to be left standing in the ruins of a fractured family and a collapsing bank account. This was not a fight that could be smoothed over with a confessional interview or a staged family dinner. This was a rupture. The unsayable had been said. And from that point forward, their home became a powder keg. Their older children, Dayton, Aurora, and Brianna, allegedly began tiptoeing through the house, retreating to their rooms to escape the tension. Even Solomon and Ariella, the youngest, were not immune to the atmosphere, sensing in their bones that something between their parents had broken in a way no family therapist could fix. The gilded cage was cracking, and every day it grew colder inside. Behind closed doors, discussions about finances turned into accusations. Every unpaid bill, every denied loan, every delayed payment was another piece of evidence in their personal courtroom of blame. Robyn, once shielded by her image as the favorite wife, now stood exposed as the partner of a man with no empire left to rule. And Cody, stripped of his power, found himself cornered, not just by debt, but by the emotional fallout of years of choosing one woman over the rest. As their financial situation worsened, whispers from insiders suggested that they were forced to quietly liquidate certain assets, including possessions that had been shown proudly on television in more prosperous times. The once fiercely guarded image of strength was now built on shaky loans, maxed out credit, and whispered desperation. Why would Robyn, the woman who had for years presented herself as the embodiment of loyalty, the one who never tired of preaching about commitment, trust and family unity, decide to secretly record her own husband? According to our exclusive theory, built upon countless conversations with people who have analyzed her behavior for years and who have observed the subtle shifts in her public and private demeanor, this was not a rash act or a mere emotional impulse. It was a carefully calculated act of self-preservation and strategy. Robyn has always been a survivor. It is embedded in her very nature. She is not a woman who simply allows herself to be swept away by the tide. She reads the waves, charts the current, and searches for the nearest lifeboat before the storm fully hits. She had seen the ship begin to list long before the rest of the crew acknowledged it. She recognized that Cody's temper was no longer something she could soothe with soft words and tears. It had begun to evolve into something sharper, louder, and more dangerous. His rages were growing more frequent, his fury more intense, and his blame increasingly focused. The adoration she once commanded, the pedestal upon which she had been placed as the queen of his kingdom, had begun to crack beneath her feet. In his eyes, she was no longer the cherished centerpiece of his new life, but an irritant, a scapegoat, a symbol of everything that had gone wrong. And Robyn, perceptive and tactical as ever, understood the trajectory all too well. If, or when, it all came crashing down, she knew he would not go quietly. He would paint her as the villain. He would tell the world that she was the manipulative one, the woman who drained the family's resources, who whispered poison into his ear, who tore his family apart piece by piece until only they were left standing. He would cast himself as the fallen king betrayed by the woman he trusted most, and she would be branded the Black Widow at the center of the web. So, the recording, according to our analysis, was not born out of a moment of trembling fear for her immediate physical safety, though that may have played a role. Rather, it was a move designed to collect evidence, a shield, a weapon, an insurance policy. It was her trump card, something she could play to secure not only her narrative, but also, crucially, her financial future in the event of an explosive divorce. She needed undeniable proof that he was the one who was losing control, that he was the one rewriting their history, that he was the one who had become verbally abusive and unhinged. And with the mounting financial pressure, the collapsing property dreams, and the tension festering within those walls, she didn't have to wait long for the perfect opportunity. The day of the final screaming match began, ironically, with news that should have united them in shared heartbreak. Official notice that the Coyote Pass property, the land that had represented their dream, their future, their supposed legacy, was being placed into foreclosure auction. The dream they had clung to so desperately, the land they had argued over, cried over, and spun grand plans upon, was gone. Torn from their grasp. The symbolic center of their entire narrative was crumbling, and instead of mourning, Cody erupted. Not a quiet devastation, not tears, not grief. Rage, explosive, unfiltered, furious rage. Robyn, according to our insider account, had anticipated this moment. She allegedly placed her mobile phone on the kitchen counter, discreetly hidden behind a fruit bowl, and pressed record before Cody even entered the room. She then delivered the devastating news, fully aware of the reaction it would unleash. The recording, later said to have been submitted as evidence in a court filing, was reportedly over an hour long. Though the entire tape has not been leaked, key excerpts have been described to us, and they are chilling in their intensity. It begins with Cody roaring incoherently, pacing and pounding his fists against the cold granite worktops, railing against the bank, the government, and, of course, the other wives. "They did this!" he allegedly shouted, his voice echoing through the kitchen. Christine and Janelle with their lawyers and their demands. "They bled us dry. They wanted me to fail, and they got what they wanted." Robyn's voice at the start of the tape is described as calm, deliberate, almost coaxing. "Cody, it's not their fault," she says. "We made investment mistakes." And with that one phrase, the inferno ignites. By deflecting blame away from the others, she inadvertently directs it straight back at him and, by extension, at them as a couple. His fury pivots in an instant. "Investment mistakes?" he bellows. "You were the biggest investment mistake I ever made. I was a king before I met you. A king, I had a family. It was messy. It was chaotic. But it was mine. I had their respect. Maybe not their love, but I had their damn respect." His voice reportedly grows quieter then, lower, more dangerous, a growl rather than a shout as he steps closer to her. "And then you came along. You and your 3 kids and your mountain of debt. You and your tears and your visions from God. You sold me a fairy tale, Robyn. You sold me soulmates and destiny and heavenly confirmation." According to the transcript our source claims to have seen, Robyn tries to interject, "Cody, that's not fair. I loved you. I sacrificed everything for you." But he laughs. A bitter, ugly laugh. "Sacrificed? You sacrificed nothing. You upgraded. You came into a fully established family and became the queen overnight. You convinced me to cut them off one by one. Christine is mean to me, Cody. Janelle doesn't respect our family rules. Cody. Mary is just too much drama, Cody. You whispered in my ear for years, poisoning me against them, isolating me until it was just you. The most damning section of the recording, the one that corresponds to the short audio clip allegedly circulated to select insiders, comes next. His voice is hoarse, ragged with fury and something like despair. And now look at us, he screams. We have nothing. The land is gone. The money is gone. The family is gone. My legacy is a joke. I'm a laughingstock. And it's all because of you. This is your fault. You and your Black Widow soul. You suck the life, the money, the spirit out of everything you touch, and then you cry and play the victim when the host body is dead. Well, the host body is dead, Robyn. This is the breaking point. The moment where every carefully constructed piece of their fairy tale romance disintegrates in a burst of hatred so raw, it practically scorches through the recording. He wasn't just blaming her for financial ruin. He was rewriting their entire shared history, casting himself as the fallen monarch and her as the usurper. A divine romance recast as a hostile takeover. And Robyn captured it all. Every snarl, every accusation, every venom-drenched word. In the days that followed, the house reportedly fell into an eerie silence. Cody moved into a spare bedroom. They only communicated via text, even under the same roof. Robyn had her trump card and she was simply waiting for the perfect moment to use it. Cody, still drowning in rage and self-pity, was completely unaware that his own words would soon be weaponized against him in ways he could not have foreseen. The love story was finished. The war was about to begin. Robyn's next step was as precise as it was desperate. She didn't immediately file for divorce. Instead, she took the recording and hired a lawyer, a formidable figure by all accounts, and filed for an emergency restraining order against Cody Brown. Her filing, as described by our source, painted a chilling picture. She claimed she feared for her life and for the lives of her children. She cited his words, Black Widow soul, as evidence of his unstable and threatening state of mind. She portrayed herself as the battered wife trapped in a home with a man who had descended into a monster, a danger to her and their family. The audio recording became Exhibit A, the irrefutable evidence of verbal and emotional abuse, the linchpin of her narrative. In her mind, this was checkmate. She believed it would get him removed from the home, give her sole control over what remained of their assets, and most importantly, secure her place as the victim in the court of public opinion, once the inevitable, explosive divorce unfolded. But there was one thing Robyn hadn't accounted for: the cold, dispassionate eye of the law. The judge assigned to the case was not swayed by the theatrics of reality television, nor by emotional performances. This was a legal arena, not a television set. Robyn's gambit, designed to cement her position and destroy his, was about to be scrutinized with clinical precision. What had begun as a private implosion of their relationship was on the brink of becoming a public unraveling of their entire mythos, a dissection of the facade they had both so carefully built. The collapse of a marriage that once stood at the center of a carefully constructed public image is often a quiet, bitter unraveling, but in this case, it played out like a tragic stage production stripped of its glittering set. Behind closed doors, the last remnants of an empire built on illusion fell apart under the sterile, fluorescent lights of a courtroom in Flagstaff. The end began with a recording, a single audio file that captured the precise moment a carefully curated love story turned to ash. It was not filmed for television, not designed for the soft glow of the confessional interview chair, but for the harsh scrutiny of a judge who had spent decades cutting through theatrics to reach the truth. The woman who made the recording arrived at court dressed conservatively, her face frozen in a mask of sorrow and practiced fear, accompanied by an expensive lawyer. On the other side of the courtroom sat the man she once called her king, disheveled and hollow-eyed, represented by court-appointed legal aid because, according to those close to the situation, he could no longer afford private counsel. Once a patriarch who commanded an entire household, he now looked like a dethroned ruler, stripped of power and pride. The centerpiece of the hearing was the explosive audio she had recorded. Vicious words, cruel accusations, a torrent of bitterness that painted him as a man consumed by rage. In the recording, he screamed that she had been his greatest mistake, called her the reason he had lost everything, and laid bare the festering resentments of a relationship that had long since stopped being romantic. His words dripped with fury, and for a brief moment, it seemed she would easily convince the court that this was the voice of a dangerous man. But the woman presiding over the hearing was not a television producer. She was a judge with decades of experience and little patience for performance. When the recording ended, she listened as the woman took the stand, tears streaking down her face, recounting nights of fear, doors locked against an unpredictable temper, escalating verbal tirades that she claimed had made her feel unsafe. It was, in every sense, a performance, a role she had perfected over years in front of cameras, now redeployed before the bench. Then came his turn. He admitted to saying those terrible things, insisting that they were not threats but the cries of a broken man crushed by financial ruin, familial collapse, and the shattering of his identity as patriarch. He claimed he had never and would never raise a hand to her or their children, that his cruelty was verbal, born of desperation rather than danger. He appeared weak, pathetic even, and for a moment it seemed she would win easily. But that illusion fractured the moment the judge began to speak. Calmly and methodically, she picked apart the recording not for its volume or venom, but for its content. She began by confirming that the recording had been made in secret, that it had begun before the man even entered the room, implying that she had anticipated confrontation and prepared for it. Then she honed in on the subject of the argument itself. Not bruises or threats of violence, but money, property, failed investments, and financial betrayal. The root of their blow-up, the judge observed, was not fear, but finance. When pressed, the woman had to agree that his fury stemmed from financial collapse. And then came the blow that changed the entire direction of the hearing. The judge noted that in the recording, the man repeatedly accused her of isolating him from his other family members, cutting him off from the world that had once made him feel powerful and loved, leaving him alone in a financial and emotional sinkhole. He accused her of convincing him to sever ties and then watching everything fall apart. The judge calmly asked if these were not, in essence, the words of someone in a business dispute, rather than an abuser threatening violence. Her lawyer objected, but the objection was overruled. What the judge saw was not a frightened woman and a dangerous man. She saw two people locked in a power struggle over a crumbling empire. She noted that the woman's voice in the recording was not trembling or panicked. It was calm, measured, challenging. She did not sound like someone fearing for her life. She sounded like a partner in a negotiation, correcting, provoking, pushing back. The mask began to crack. Years of public whispers about manipulation, favoritism, and financial scheming suddenly found their way into a courtroom transcript. When the verdict came, it was devastating for her. The judge denied the request for a restraining order and delivered a damning assessment of their entire relationship. This was not, the judge declared, a case of domestic abuse, but the final, pitiful act of mutual destruction between two people who had treated their relationship like a transaction. 14 years of televised history of money and control had led to this moment. The man's behavior, the judge said, was reprehensible. His rage, narcissism, and self-pity obvious. But it did not rise to the level of a physical threat warranting legal separation from his home or children. Then she turned to the woman and delivered a more cutting judgment. She accused her of attempting to weaponize the recording, of presenting herself not as a victim, but as a co-conspirator in a long-standing emotional and financial scheme. The judge said she had wanted the man as a king, but not the rest of his kingdom, had isolated him and benefited from it, and now that the money had dried up, was trying to discard him and play the victim. The recording, she concluded, proved not that the woman was in danger, but that their love story was merely a financial transaction gone bad. This was a divorce matter, not a criminal one. Case dismissed. The courtroom fell silent. Her mask shattered. His dignity remained in ruins. But the judge had spoken aloud what many had whispered for years. This was not a romance, but a toxic merger that had finally